Some films from the 1,970 seconds weren't just edgy, they were thrown out of theaters, seized by censors, or whispered about in secret for years. Why? Because they dared to push boundaries audiences weren't ready for. What happens when art goes too far for its own decade, only to return decades later as a must-watch? Buckle up. These forgotten 70 seconds gems were once forbidden, but now they're streaming freely and daring you to press play. Ready to see what made them so unstoppable? Emmanuelle 1974. Imagine a film so soft in its delivery, yet so bold in its suggestion that entire countries debated whether it should even exist. That was Emmanuelle. Released in 1974, this French drama followed a young woman's journey into self-discovery and personal freedom while living abroad. What looked like an art house curiosity quickly turned into a global phenomenon, especially in markets unprepared for its frank portrayal of intimacy. Behind the scenes, Emmanuelle was shot with a stylish, dreamlike quality, transforming it from a simple story into a cultural conversation. The French film industry supported it, but censors in the United States, Britain, and across Asia weren't so forgiving. Ratings boards fought over how much to cut, and some theaters outright refused to show it. Ironically, all that controversy only fueled ticket sales. Instead of sinking into obscurity, the film became one of the highest-grossing French productions ever released internationally. It spawned sequels, imitators, and eventually became shorthand for an entire wave of daring European cinema in the 70 seconds. Once viewed as taboo, it's now widely available to stream. Its glossy visuals and boldness may seem tame compared to modern standards, but at the time, Emmanuelle was a cultural thunderclap. If you want to experience the movie that rattled old censors and inspired new filmmakers, this one is waiting for you. The Last House on the Left, 1972. If horror films of the 60 seconds still felt like campfire tales, Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left kicked the genre into a whole new league of raw fear. Marketed with the infamous tagline, "It's only a movie," this story of two girls encountering brutality in the countryside pushed audiences to their breaking point. Craven, who later gave us A Nightmare on Elm Street, made this film on a tiny budget with an unflinching style that felt more like a documentary than fiction. The roughness wasn't polished, it was the point. It looked real, felt real, and left people shaken. No surprise then, the British Board of Film Classification banned it outright, and police in the United States seized copies. And yet, horror fans couldn't stay away. Bootleg VHS tapes circulated in college dorms and midnight screenings. For many, it became the first horror film that felt truly dangerous. What critics initially called exploitative has since been revisited as a groundbreaking experiment in style, tone, and unrelenting atmosphere. Today, The Last House on the Left streams uncensored. Its influence can be felt in every modern survival horror, from mainstream blockbusters to indie hits. Watching it now, you can see the skeleton of Craven's career forming, along with the seeds of a genre that would never look the same again. If you think you've seen horror, this one dares you to reconsider. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Few films carried the same level of controversy in the late 70 seconds as this one. Known in its initial release as Day of the Woman, the film told the story of a writer who retreats to a cabin seeking peace, only to face unthinkable trauma and a fight for survival. What set it apart wasn't just the storyline, but the unrelenting way it forced viewers to sit with the aftermath. Director Meyer Zarchi didn't soften anything, and censors across Europe and North America reacted immediately. In Britain, it landed on the infamous Video Nasties list, making it practically illegal to own for years. In the U.S., some states banned screenings, while others allowed heavily edited versions that cut entire scenes. Critics called it too much, audiences were divided, and yet it quietly built a reputation as a cult classic. Over the decades, the film's meaning has been debated endlessly. Some dismiss it as exploitation, while others argue it's one of the first raw depictions of resilience and revenge in cinema. Regardless of stance, there's no denying its place in history as a lightning rod for censorship battles. Today, the film streams freely in its original form, often introduced with warnings about its intensity. Watching it now, it's clear why it became one of the most talked-about cult films of the 1970 seconds. It's not easy viewing, but it's essential if you want to understand how far cinema was willing to go to confront audiences in that era. Eraserhead 1977. David Lynch's Eraserhead is the kind of film that makes you wonder how something so strange even got made, and then how it became a legend. Shot in black and white with an industrial soundscape, this surreal nightmare follows Henry Spencer, a man grappling with a crumbling world, a crying child, and his own unraveling mind. When it premiered, audiences didn't know what to make of it. Some walked out, others sat in stunned silence. And plenty of theaters refused to screen it at all, considering it too bizarre for mainstream release. But in the underground circuit, Eraserhead grew into a phenomenon. Midnight screenings at small art houses gave it a second life, and word spread quickly. This wasn't just a movie, it was an experience. The strange visuals, eerie sound design, and disturbing imagery caused debate among critics. Was it art, or was it nonsense? Even Lynch himself called it a deeply personal film that reflected his fears at the time. Decades later, it's praised as one of the most influential independent films ever created. Eraserhead is now widely available to stream, and its influence can be traced everywhere, from the style of modern horror directors to the music videos of experimental bands. Watching it feels like stepping into a dream you can't wake up from, one that leaves you unsettled long after the credits roll. If you've never dared to press play, consider this your invitation. The Hills Have Eyes 1977. After rattling audiences with The Last House on the Left, Wes Craven returned with another disturbing vision, The Hills Have Eyes. This desert-set horror follows a family stranded in the Nevada wilderness, only to discover they're not alone. What waits in the hills is savage, cunning, and hungry for more than just trouble. Made on a low budget, the film relied on barren landscapes, gritty makeup, and sheer tension to drive its story. The result? A survival horror that felt relentless from start to finish. Censors in the UK and Australia refused to grant full certification, citing its relentless cruelty, and for years it was only available in cut versions. Yet, just like his earlier work, Craven turned controversy into momentum. Fans embraced its raw energy, and it became a staple of the drive-in and midnight movie circuit. Michael Berryman's unforgettable performance as Pluto added an iconic face to the film's terrifying family of outcasts. What started as a scrappy, low-budget project grew into a franchise, spawning sequels, remakes, and countless imitators. Today, the original 1977 film streams in full, and it remains just as unsettling as ever. If The Last House on the Left was Craven's first warning shot, The Hills Have Eyes was proof he knew exactly how to keep audiences awake at night. Ilsa, Harem Keeper of the Oil Sheiks, 1976. If you thought the first Ilsa film was extreme, the sequel turned the dial even higher. Ilsa, Harem Keeper of the Oil Sheiks, followed the infamous character as she relocated from the shadows of wartime prisons to the deserts of the Middle East. The result was a wild mix of camp, power, and excess that quickly sent censors into panic mode. Shot in just a matter of weeks, the production was rushed but packed with spectacle. Diane Thorne returned as Ilsa, delivering her performance with theatrical energy that fans couldn't get enough of. The over-the-top sets, outrageous storylines, and relentless pace made it unlike anything else playing in theaters. Yet, that was exactly the problem for ratings boards. Many countries refused to screen it, while others hacked away large portions, leaving audiences confused and critics outraged. Despite its chaotic reception, the film developed a loyal fan base. Grindhouse theaters loved it, and collectors sought uncut versions on VHS and imported reels. Over time, critics revisited the film and recognized it not just as lurid entertainment, but as a bizarre time capsule of 1970 seconds excess. Today, it streams in its original form, preserved by cult distributors who celebrate its unapologetic approach. While it's far from mainstream taste, there's no denying its place in the pantheon of notorious 70-second cinema. For better or worse, Ilsa was here to stay, and this sequel proved the character could survive and thrive in any setting. Salon Kitty, 1976. Now, here's a film that blurred the line between political drama and exploitation in a way that stunned censors. Salon Kitty, directed by Italian filmmaker Tinto Brass, told the story of a Berlin brothel used by powerful officials as a place of surveillance, indulgence, and manipulation during a time of rising authoritarianism. Based loosely on true events, the film combined historical references with a level of daring storytelling that alarmed audiences across Europe. It wasn't just the subject matter, it was the bold way Brass presented it, filled with lavish production design and an unflinching focus on corruption and abuse of power. When it premiered, many critics couldn't decide if it was high art or shameless shock value. Several countries banned the film outright, others cut it so heavily that important storylines vanished. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, the censorship battles, Salon Kitty became infamous. Its mix of political intrigue and over-the-top decadence was unlike anything else. Over time, historians have pointed out its significance as more than a sensational film. It was a commentary on how private spaces can be twisted into tools of control, wrapped in the style of 1970 seconds European cinema. Now available to stream, the film remains a controversial piece of history, equal parts spectacle and statement. If you want to understand just how bold filmmakers were willing to be in that era, Salon Kitty is a must-watch. The Beast La Bête, 1975. Some films shock not with violence, but with surreal imagination. The Beast, directed by Walerian Borocek, is one such film. A French production that blurred fantasy, romance, and nightmare. It told the story of a young woman whose wedding plans spiral into bizarre visions involving creatures and forbidden desires. At the time of release, The Beast was treated like dynamite by censors. Its dream sequences, especially, were considered far too much for mainstream theaters. Many European countries banned it outright. In the United States, distributors refused to touch it until edited versions began circulating years later. But here's the thing. Beneath the scandal was a beautifully crafted, symbolic film. Borocek had built his reputation in animation and art house shorts, and he carried that same painterly eye into this feature. The result was something unlike any other film of the decade, part fairy tale, part nightmare, and entirely unforgettable. What began as a shock piece has since been re-evaluated as an art film that used wild imagery to critique repression and control. Collectors kept it alive for decades through imported tapes and underground screenings. Now it's streaming in restored editions, allowing viewers to finally see it as Borocek intended. Love it or hate it, The Beast is one of those films you'll never forget once you've experienced it. Flesh for Frankenstein, 1973. If you think you know the story of Frankenstein, Andy Warhol's production team made sure you didn't. Flesh for Frankenstein, also known as Andy Warhol's Frankenstein, turned the classic tale into a colorful, outrageous spectacle filled with exaggerated performances and shock effects that pushed censors to their limits. Directed by Paul Morrissey, the film was originally shot in 3D, meaning audiences were supposed to watch its grotesque set pieces leap out at them. Critics called it tasteless, bizarre, and even offensive. In Britain, it was banned for years. In other regions, it was released only in censored versions that stripped away entire sequences. Yet, like many films on this list, the censorship only made it more intriguing. Midnight screenings embraced its mix of camp and horror, and it slowly built a reputation as one of the strangest Frankenstein adaptations ever put to screen. Udo Kier's performance as Baron Frankenstein became legendary for its theatrical excess, and Morrissey's direction leaned into dark humor as much as it did horror. Today, Flesh for Frankenstein streams in restored editions that highlight its vivid cinematography and audacious approach. While it's not a film for everyone, it remains a cult classic that shows just how wild 1,970 seconds filmmakers were willing to get with familiar stories. If you thought Frankenstein was old news, this film proved there was always a new, shocking way to reimagine it. Blood for Dracula, 1974. Hot on the heels of Flesh for Frankenstein came its twisted companion, Blood for Dracula, again produced by Andy Warhol's Circle and directed by Paul Morrissey. This time, the target was the legend of Count Dracula. Udo Kier once again took center stage, delivering an unforgettable performance as a weakened, desperate Dracula traveling through Europe in search of sustenance. Like its predecessor, Blood for Dracula was bold, strange, and immediately controversial. Critics accused it of being grotesque parody, while censors zeroed in on its most outrageous imagery. Several countries banned it, while others allowed heavily edited versions. Behind the sensational surface, though, was a surprisingly sharp satire. Morrissey used the Dracula myth to comment on class, privilege, and desperation, all wrapped in vivid visuals and campy performances. The result was a film that could make you laugh one minute and squirm the next. Over the years, it has grown into a cult favorite, often screened alongside Flesh for Frankenstein as a bizarre double feature. Fans celebrate its audacity, while historians note it as part of Warhol's larger attempt to reshape familiar myths through the lens of 70 seconds counterculture. Now freely streaming, Blood for Dracula stands as proof that even the oldest legends can be turned upside down when handed to bold filmmakers. It's camp, it's art, and it's unforgettable. If you think you've seen every Dracula story, this one will surprise you. Snuff 1976. Imagine walking into a theater and being told the film you're about to see might contain a real killing. That was the marketing hook behind Snuff, a low-budget exploitation movie that became infamous for its final minutes. The film itself was originally a rough Argentinian production, but American distributors rebranded it with a new ending, suggesting audiences were witnessing something authentic. The ploy worked. Too well. News outlets covered it, protest groups called for boycotts, and police raided screenings looking for evidence. Censors didn't know how to handle it, and the rumor mill only grew bigger. Despite the final scene being staged with special effects, many believed the hype. Critics despised the film, calling it a cheap trick designed to cash in on shock value. Yet that notoriety cemented its place in cinema history. For years, Snuff was whispered about as one of the most dangerous films ever made. In reality, it was less about what was on screen and more about how it manipulated audience fears. Today, the film is widely available online, stripped of its aura of mystery. Watching it now, it plays more like a fascinating case study in marketing than a serious threat. But its impact on censorship debates was massive, sparking conversations about the limits of promotion, distribution, and responsibility. Whether you consider it shameless or clever, Snuff remains a one-of-a-kind artifact from the 1970 seconds. Caligula 1979. Few films from the 1970 seconds carried as much controversy as Caligula. Funded in part by Penthouse magazine's publisher, the film set out to tell the story of Rome's infamous emperor with lavish sets, an all-star cast, and scenes that no one had dared put on screen in such detail before. Malcolm McDowell starred as the young ruler, with Helen Mirren and Peter O'Toole in supporting roles. The trouble began in editing. Director Tinto Brass shot a political drama, but producers later inserted additional scenes that pushed the film far beyond what mainstream audiences expected. The result was a sprawling epic that was banned, censored, or released in heavily cut versions around the world. Some countries refused to screen it at all. Critics tore it apart for years, dismissing it as indulgent and chaotic. But over time, Caligula gained a strange new reputation. Fans praised its audacity, its grand production design, and McDowell's fierce performance. Film historians studied it as an example of how creative visions can collide with producers' agendas in unpredictable ways. Now streaming in restored editions, Caligula is less a historical drama and more an experience, messy, extravagant, and unforgettable. For anyone curious about how far 1,970 seconds cinema was willing to go, this is one of the most infamous examples. It's the film that tried to mix high art with raw spectacle, and in doing so, it burned its way into history. Performance 1,970. Before he became a music icon, Mick Jagger made his mark on cinema in a film that rattled Warner Brothers so much they shelved it for 2 years. Performance, co-directed by Donald Cammell and Nicholas Roeg, blended gangster drama with psychedelic imagery in a way audiences had never seen before. The story followed a London criminal hiding out in the home of a reclusive rock star, played by Jagger, where identity and reality began to blur. The visuals were disorienting, the editing experimental, and the atmosphere dreamlike. When executives first saw it, they didn't know whether to call it a crime film, an art film, or a disaster. Censors didn't help. With its bold imagery and hallucinatory sequences, performance faced immediate pushback. It was cut, delayed, and dismissed as incomprehensible. But once it finally reached theaters in 1970, it quickly developed a cult following. Younger audiences embraced its wild energy, while critics eventually reappraised it as a masterpiece of British cinema. Today, performance is streaming and celebrated for its fearless experimentation. Jagger's presence adds star power, but it's the film's fractured style and hypnotic mood that make it stand out. Decades later, it feels ahead of its time, laying the groundwork for music videos, art house cinema, and boundary-pushing storytelling. If you've ever wanted to see what happens when rock and roll collides with surreal gangster noir, this is the film, Duck, You Sucker, A Fistful of Dynamite. 1971. Sergio Leone, the legendary director behind The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, delivered one more explosive western in the early 70 seconds. Duck, You Sucker, also known as A Fistful of Dynamite, followed an unlikely friendship between an Irish revolutionary and a Mexican outlaw during the Mexican Revolution. The film combined Leone's trademark sweeping visuals with political commentary and bursts of raw intensity. But the title alone caused problems. Different regions marketed it under different names, trying to soften its impact. Ireland outright banned it due to its depiction of revolution, while in other countries, entire scenes were trimmed down. At first, audiences didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't as polished or playful as Leone's earlier westerns, and critics were divided. But over time, Duck, You Sucker has been recognized as one of his most ambitious works. Its exploration of loyalty, betrayal, and survival resonated more deeply with each passing decade. Now freely streaming, the film is appreciated not just for Leone's direction, but also for Ennio Morricone's haunting score, considered one of his finest. While it may have been overlooked in its own time, today it stands tall as a hidden classic of the 1,970 seconds. For fans of westerns that dig deeper than gunslingers and standoffs, this is essential viewing. House on Straw Hill 1976. Sometimes a film doesn't need huge sets or elaborate effects to spark outrage, it just needs atmosphere and nerve. House on Straw Hill, released in 1976 and also known as Exposé, was a British thriller that became one of the most notorious entries on the UK's Video Nasties list. The story follows a successful but arrogant writer who hires a secretary to help with his work in a remote countryside home. What begins as a professional arrangement quickly spirals into paranoia, manipulation, and sudden violence. The claustrophobic setting and psychological tension make it feel like the walls are closing in on both the characters and the viewer. When it premiered, critics dismissed it as cheap exploitation, but censors went much further. In the United Kingdom, it was banned outright, and police seized VHS copies during the height of the moral panic over violent films. In other countries, it was heavily cut, leaving audiences with fragmented versions that diluted the story's intensity. For decades, House on Straw Hill existed mostly as a whispered title among collectors, a film many had heard of but few had actually seen uncut. That scarcity only fueled its reputation. Eventually, it was restored and re-released, giving audiences the chance to finally experience it as intended. Now available to stream, it stands as a fascinating example of how a modestly budgeted thriller could generate enormous controversy. With its moody performances, especially from Udo Kier and Linda Hayden, and its relentless atmosphere, House on Straw Hill is a reminder that sometimes the most confined stories can create the loudest uproar. Thundercrack, 1975. There are strange films, and then there's Thundercrack, a midnight movie so wild it defies easy description. Directed by Kurt McDowell and produced with input from underground filmmaker George Kuchar, the film mixed gothic horror, slapstick comedy, and raw shock value into one unforgettable package. Set inside a crumbling mansion during a storm, the film assembled an oddball group of characters whose night spiraled into chaos. Shot in stark black and white, it felt like a parody of old haunted house films, but with a surreal anything-goes sensibility. Audiences didn't know what hit them. Some laughed, some walked out, and censors in multiple countries banned it altogether. What kept it alive, however, was the underground film circuit. Thundercrack became a staple of midnight screenings, passed around on battered reels, and later on VHS among die-hard collectors. For years, the full version was nearly impossible to find, and that only made its legend grow. Today, Thundercrack streams in restored editions that finally let audiences see it in its full, outrageous glory. It's not a film that tries to please everyone. In fact, it seems to take joy in alienating the mainstream. But that's exactly what makes it such a cult classic. If you think you've seen the strangest the 70 seconds had to offer, Thundercrack dares you to think again. Goodbye, Uncle Tom, 1971. Goodbye, Uncle Tom may be the most polarizing film on this list. Directed by Italian filmmakers Gualtiero Jacopetti and Franco Prosperi, it was presented as a pseudo-documentary about the history of slavery in America. Using elaborate sets, hundreds of extras, and staged reenactments, it aimed to confront audiences with the brutality of the past. But the way it did so shocked nearly everyone. Critics accused it of being exploitative, insensitive, and inflammatory. Audiences either saw it as a necessary confrontation with history or a grotesque miscalculation. The backlash was swift. Countries banned it, theaters refused to screen it, and it was condemned by critics across the board. Yet, like many films on this list, its controversy made it unforgettable. Bootleg copies kept its reputation alive, and debates about its intentions never fully went away. Was it an attempt at social commentary or just an excuse for shock value? Decades later, film historians continue to argue about it. Now available to stream, Goodbye, Uncle Tom is one of those films that viewers watch not for entertainment, but for the sheer audacity of its existence. It's disturbing, provocative, and divisive, but it's also a powerful reminder of how far 1970 seconds filmmakers were willing to go to provoke discussion. Whether you consider it important or appalling, it remains one of the boldest films ever made. And there you have it, 18 more films from the 1970 seconds that censors tried to bury, but time refused to forget. From surreal nightmares to raw survival tales, each one proves that cinema's most daring decade didn't just test audiences, it rewrote the rules of what could be shown on screen. Which of these shocked you the most? Which do you think still holds up today? Drop your thoughts below, hit that subscribe button, and join us next time as we keep digging into cinema's forbidden vault.